Why are we growing bigger crops, but not necessarily better crops? It's not about more fertilizer. It's about balance. Plants don't get weak because of a certain nutrient. They get weak because of imbalances. They get weak because one's not available or tied up or mix and match, or possibly just not there enough in the soil to be taken up into the plant to make it part of what the plant is producing. Now see, we can take some correlations here. If we look at a graph from the 1950s or 60s to modern day with the nutrient density, in a lot of foods, we are seeing a decline in that nutrient density. We're seeing the graph going down. Conversely, if you see a graph of chemical fertilizer use from the 1950s to modern day, you will see that going up. Let's back up for a minute. From a 30,000 foot view, you can go, well, how can you correlate those two together? That doesn't really make sense, because yeah, we're using more fertilizer, but we're also growing more food, and some of those foods are designed and grown and bred to grow a bigger yield. And you're exactly right, and that's part of the problem too. See, nutrient density isn't caused simply just by adding a chemical fertilizer. It's caused by imbalance. Now, chemical fertilizer is a big problem because it plays on some nutrients and makes them more available that a plant can use and a plant can benefit from in the yield category, but because of the excess of a couple of nutrients in the plant, you actually create an imbalance. And when you create an imbalance, you create weak plants, you create watery plants, you create plants that have a harder time surviving. And then therefore you could correlate that the increased use in herbicide and pesticides over the same time period is directly caused by the type of fertilizer we're using and how we're farming it. And the biggest thing about all of this is we've already can fix nutrient density. It's not like it's rocket science. It's not like it's way out there. Like, we actually know how to fix nutrient density. Like, we know exactly what it looks like. And it comes down to typically carbon and oxygen in the soil. Because carbon and oxygen in the soil, the more you have, the more the microbes will do their job. The more you have, the more healthy the system is, the better the nutrients flow. All those nutrient cycles only work well with plenty of carbon and oxygen in the soil. And I can tell you, and the USDA has even told us, that in the 1950s, the average farm in America had about 8% organic matter. Now, I know organic matter is not the end-all be-all carbon source, but just hear me out here. 8% organic matter. The average in the country today is 3%. That is a huge change. And if you don't know anything about organic matter, the easiest way I can explain it is basically it's this stuff in the ground that's been decomposed or, processed into soil matter one time. So it's organic carbon mostly of certain sources. Structural, bugs can eat residue if it's broken down into what's called weoc, which is another subject for another time. But here comes the problem. Chemical fertilizer completely interrupts the natural soil system's ability to do its job. And when we interrupt that system, we introduce excesses of nutrients that can cause imbalances in the plant. Those imbalances directly lead to nutrient deficiency. Two of the most obvious are carbon and oxygen. And the reason that carbon and oxygen is such a big deal is because the plant is literally designed to make sugar. That's what plants are trying to do. They take in the sun, they make sugar, they shove it down in the ground, the bugs party, they respirate CO2, it goes back and up through the ground into the plant, and that cycle goes over and over again. And because that cycle goes over and over again, and then the bugs pull in other nutrients that the plant needs, which on a dry matter basis, a plant is actually made up of 94% sugar and 90% carbon and oxygen. So it's super critical for a plant to have access readily to carbon and oxygen, because when you don't have enough carbon and oxygen and you have an excess of nitrogen and potassium, what ends up happening is with nitrogen, you get a soft plant or a weak plant, kind of a spongy plant when you have too much nitrogen there. And that leads to disease. That lowers the plant's natural ability to fight disease. And that's where we get, a lot of these diseases. And then when you genetically modify that, it only amplifies that, because you're taking a plant and making it, some would say, more like a weed, but not necessarily a plant to be able to handle those higher nitrogen and potassium rates, but you always have to give up something. And eventually what happens is you give up the plant's ability to naturally make sugar. You are hurting the plant's ability to create what it's made of. And then if you don't have enough oxygen for a plant, potassium a lot of times becomes excessive. And when potassium becomes excessive, if you didn't know, potassium is an electrolyte, it holds on to water. So that's what makes a watery plant. So in very general terms, we are literally weakening and watering down the nutrients in our plant. And another reason that we know this to be true is that some people have been doing research on phytonutrients in beef cattle, where they compare traditionally raised cattle versus more regeneratively raised cattle. And when they look at cattle on a regenerative diet designed to feed them forage and designed to give them the food that they're able to digest, which is grass without any corn or any of that other stuff in there, without any grain, those animals translate much higher phytonutrient content. And as the soil of the farms that those cattle are on improve, the feed improves and the meat improves. But guess what? They're not using chemical fertilizer, and they are not lacking carbon and oxygen. So at the end of the day, what comes down to it is if we want to fundamentally change the nutrient density of our plants, and this is everything, carotenoids, phytonutrients, amino acids, any of the words that you can think of to describe a nutrient within a plant, all of them, if you want to make those of higher quality and we want to increase the quality of our crops, we have to absolutely pay attention to carbon and oxygen, because making carbon and oxygen available in the ground makes the entire system work better. And that's one of the biggest downfalls of modern agriculture. Modern agriculture has ignored carbon and oxygen to the detriment of the farmer and not to the fertilizer company's pocketbook, because the fertilizer company knows these things, but they're not telling anybody them. And it's really sad. So if you want to grow healthier crops, carbon and oxygen is your game. And if you want to learn more about how to get carbon and oxygen available to your plant, I'd be glad to help you. We have fertilizer solutions for people, or we have soil health solutions for anybody. Our goal is to help you grow as much healthy food as humanly possible, and that's my goal here on this farm. And the way that we do that is by getting our soil in the shape that it should be. So if you want to improve your soil health and you want to improve your crop health, I would love to talk to you about it. God bless. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time on American Beef Ranch.